For a game released in Japan almost 20 years ago, you'd expect pretty much every detail about the pre-release and beta versions of Pokémon Gold and Silver to be common knowledge, at least to people who really enjoy trawling through old information about the games on the internet. But every now and again, new information surfaces, supposedly previously lost to time but refound through one means or another. Sometimes, like Kage no Mushi, these can be a hoax made by a bored artist, and other times they turn out to be genuine screenshots or pieces of pre-release information. Like screenshots of the original design of the bag, scans of the original design for the female trainer, or more recently, this beta screenshot of Hoppip. To start off with, let's talk about the original magazine scans from Microgroup Game Review, released in 1997, showing 2 trainers and 3 Pokémon. Only one figure in this actually resembles a final design, the Tyranitar. The dude in purple is speculated to be a gym leader, and some have suggested the girl might have been the original design for the playable female trainer. This doesn't seem like a stretch, as there seems to have been plans as early as Red and Green for multiple playable trainers, suggested by the cover of the Japanese guidebook showing a girl with Squirtle, who went on to become the inspiration for the character Blue, or Green if you're in the West, in the Pokémon Special manga. From what I can tell, the guidebook was released in 1997 and doesn't have any other significant information regarding any alternate playable characters. I'll talk about the dude in purple last, as I have quite a lot to say about him, so let's go to the first notable Pokémon, the turtle tortoise kind of creature. He bears a resemblance to Tortuga, a Generation 5 Pokémon, and Game Freak have said that they keep old Pokémon designs around for future inspiration. So it's possible, and in my opinion likely, that the turtle became Tortuga. There's no further mention of it again in Gen 2 or any other pre-release or promotional material from what I can tell. Likewise, the creature which seems to be a cross between Hitmontop and Cleffa. I'm going to guess it eventually became Hitmontop, but the resemblance to Cleffa isn't not noteworthy. Once again, from what I can tell, looking through old magazine scans and pre-release screenshots, it doesn't seem like this Pokémon was mentioned again. Onto the purple dude, some have speculated he's a scrap gym leader, which is a possibility. Personally, I think that either of the 2 trainers could have just been battle classes like the Lass or the Pokemanic. But running with the idea that he could have been a gym leader, the colours suggest Dark or Ghost type, and I think Dark is more likely to show off the new type like Janine did with Steel types. In the files for the game exists alternate map data for each city. Some are drastically different, like Azalea and Lake of Rage. Azalea originally had no gym, whereas the Lake of Rage did, so it's possible if this guy was a gym leader he would have been the one for the Lake of Rage, but was scrapped later on in favour of Bugsy. Bug Pokemon are cool, but mostly associated with low-level, weaker Pokemon, so I assume that's why they moved the gym from Lake of Rage down to Azalea. I mean, that's just my speculation on it. The magazine also mentions in its article on the then-named Pocket Monsters 2, the skateboard item which would allow the player to go places inaccessible via walking or using the bike. This idea was scrapped, although the concept of using an item like that to get to otherwise inaccessible places was reused in Ruby and Sapphire with the Arcro and Mach bikes. This is the most noteworthy feature mentioned here, as aside from that, everything else in the magazine seems to have actually made it into the final game, such as the clock, new Pokemon, and new moves. The following May, the Pocket Monsters official fanbook was published by Shogakukan, with interviews from several people at Game Freak. It also contains some story information, as well as screenshots of one of the early builds of the game. Mentioned were 2 locations, Silent Hills and Orudo City. Silent Hills taking the place of Wakaba Town, or New Bark Town, and Orudo City either being a prototype Violet or Ecruteak. In the magazine, there's also sprites and concept artwork. Sprites shown for Slowking, Ampharos, and Donphan, as well as the official artwork for them, and Ho-Oh, and descriptions for all 4. Slowking and Donphan look pretty similar to their gold sprites, but the Ampharos sprite looks pretty different to its gold or silver sprite. Donphan makes sense to me, as its design was probably finalized pretty early on, as it appears in the first movie, released in 1998 in Japan, but was most likely being worked on several years prior. The descriptions for the Pokemon in the magazine are pretty vague with the exception of Slowking. I'll run through them. Donphan. This powerful looking new Pokemon seems like it could really pack a punch. The details are still unknown, but it looks like a Rhydon type Pokemon, doesn't it? Ampharos. This new type of Pokemon looks as though it came from outer space. The name suggests that it might be an electric dragon Pokemon. Its true nature is not yet known. Slowking. Slowpoke, a very stupid Pokemon, was out fishing for bait when a Shellder clamped onto its tail, causing it to evolve into a Slowbro. However, it is said that in one instance out of 10,000, a Shellder will clamp down on a Slowpoke's head instead of its tail. As the Shelder bites down, its essence penetrates into the Slowpoke's listless brain cells, bestowing upon it extreme motivation. Slowking has quickly become a hot topic among Pokemon collectors. How its evolution takes place is still unspecified, but it has been established that it evolves from Slowpoke. Ho-Oh. Ho-Oh was the first of the creatures appearing in Pokemon 2 to be revealed. It's said that this legendary Pokemon will only reveal itself to a genius. It's worth noting that in Generation 1, there were originally planned to be a few more Pokemon in the game, so it's possible that Donphan and Slowking were originally among the scrapped Gen 1 Pokemon. My speculation is that the majority of the Pokemon who evolved from Generation 1 Pokemon were probably designed for Gen 1, so Crobat, Slowking, Politoed, and Bellossom, though I don't think the same holds true for the baby Pokemon or Umbreon and Espeon, who were probably designed to highlight the breeding feature and the day and night feature. Early concept art was shown for Ledybur in Silver, where he looks a lot more innocent. His hair is a little bit shorter, but his jacket is pretty much the same as its final design. Ledybur is far more cartoonish looking. There's also a sketch of Pikachu running past what looks like music notes, which bears a resemblance to the opening sequence of Gold and Silver. Space World 1997 brought the first demo of Gold and Silver, and with it a ton of information was released onto the internet. As very little footage exists of this, a lot of what was reported can't be confirmed, so take some of the stuff mentioned with a pinch of salt, although there are some screenshots floating around from around this time showing early versions of the cities. There does exist a few seconds of footage from a 1998 British program, and a few others from a 1998 Swedish program, showing off mostly the title screen and some Gen 1 Pokemon. Interestingly, Pokemon Gold and Silver is not featured in the Space World 97 showreel from what I can tell, possibly suggesting they knew it was very unfinished at this stage, and was mostly there as a bonus. In the demo and promo video shown, there were 3 starters: Honoguma, Happa, and Kurusu. There does exist a very blurry photograph of Honoguma, thanks to Katsu Nagao on Twitter, who says he attended Space World 97. This may be the only non-officially sanctioned image from the event still in existence, and even though it's pretty blurry, it's safe to assume that the Pokemon in front is Honoguma. There was a bunch more Pokemon talked about, but I'm mostly going to focus on the ones that seemingly didn't make it into the final games. I'll also link sources from first-person accounts which said to have seen them in person at the event. Starting with Honoguma, which was scrapped in favour of Cyndaquil, its name pretty much means Fire Bear, and its attacks were said to be Scratch, Leer, and Fire, also translated as Burning or Scathing, though I think it's safe to assume this is probably an unfinished version of Ember. Next up was Kurusu, which took the place of the Water Starter in the demo, and knew Tackle, Growl, and Water Gun. All reported artwork for it is pretty undefined, and it's hard to make out what sort of creature it was meant to be. To enter starters, there was Happa, who later became Chikorita in both English and Japanese. Here's the sprite from the demo version, photographed by a Japanese blogger. The originally reported sketch by Hakuda2 originally showed it looking more like a slug in its lower half, but it seems to be a misconception by the artist. So, in truth, the only real difference Chikorita got was a name change. Its moves were Absorb, Tackle, Growth, and Leech Seed. As a side note, it's also worth mentioning that one of the main sources the internet got their Space World demo information from, Hakuda2, also confirmed Kage no Mushi as being potentially fake in this blog entry, stating that they never saw anything akin to that in the demo, but they noted it was an interesting concept and speculated that it may have been created by one of the Pokemon designers, albeit for a different project. There were more Pokemon in the demo and promo video aside from the starters. Aqua and Aquaria, who seem to be in the same evolution line, Animon, which may have been a prototype unknown, Buku, said to be a flying squirrel Pokemon, which may have been redesigned into Sentret, Ikari, a squid-like Pokemon, Netamon, who could be caught during the demo and whose name resembles Ditto's Japanese name, Metamon, and Elekking, who may have been a prototype Elekid. It's worth saying again that, because there is no real evidence aside from word of mouth, it's possible that some of these are fake or misinterpretations of already existing Pokemon, like Netamon to Metamon. It could just be someone misread it. Without seeing the promotional video from Space World 98 or the demo itself, we'll probably never know which ones were real. Honestly, I'd love to see the sprites more clearly for Honoguma and Kurusu though. Also appearing in the demo were early designs for Marill, Quillfish, Girafarig, Hoppip, Jumpluff, Skarmory, Smeargle, and Sunflora, all of them receiving name changes later on in development with the exception of Hoppip and Jumpluff. It's also worth noting that by this point, the promo video only showed Pokémon Gold, and none of the demo information mentioned Silver or Lugia. There's been speculation that Lugia was added to the game way later on in development. Not necessarily developed later, but seemingly they programmed Gold before Silver. Referencing the translation of a Japanese fan's account on the event, on Glitterberry's game translation, here is an interesting note regarding items in the demo. The Pokemon you got came equipped with a berry. When its health dipped below 50%, it would automatically use the berry to heal itself at the end of its turn. I believe the amount of the HP that berries heal is fixed, but because my max HP is pretty low to begin with, using one always brought my Pokemon back to full health. You also started out with 5 Pokeballs, 10 potions, 10 full heals, 1 Stimulus Orb, and 1 Fire Up Orb. When equipped by a Pokemon, the Stimulus Orb would occasionally prevent it from falling asleep, and the Fire Up Orb would occasionally prevent it from fainting. Pokemon could equip one item at a time. There is unused text in the final build of the game referencing these items, which I'll go into towards the end. But by Fire Up Orb, I assume it means more like Motivating Orb, rather than fire, like fire type. I mean, items like that do exist in the game now, so it's pretty believable to me. Another mention from the Glitterberry's translation is, to the west of the area was a plateau, and in the middle was a dungeon that resembled Viridian Forest from the previous game, containing tall grass and trainers. The wild Pokemon I encountered there were Caterpie and Metapod. The trainers had Paris, Venonat, Clefairy, Meowth, and Slowking. It seems like the trainers' Pokemon now have PP, which gets depleted. The trainers in this area had names like Bugcatcher Junichi, Lass Hidzuki, and Beauty Megumi. Trainers with the names Junichi, Hidzuki, and Megumi all appear in the final game, in Vermilion Gym, Union Cave, and National Park. So here's what I can gather from pulling together all of the accounts of the Space World demo. During the demo, the first town seemed to be Silent Hills, and apparently had the player's house, a laboratory, and a Pokemon Center. The rival was hanging around, assumably in a similar fashion to how he is in the final game, and a news story would play when interacting with the TV about how Professor Oak had gone missing. Heading to the west would bring the player to the first route, which had Pidgey and Rattata, which can be found in the final game there, but also Pikachu, Marill, Sunflora, Ladybug, Hoppip, and Girafarig. The next area was a forest with Caterpie and Metapod, and a handful of trainers who used Paris, Clefairy, Meowth, Snorlax, and Slowking. At the end of the forest was a gate building, blocked off by the rival. Once talking to the rival, the demo would end. From visitor accounts, the day and night cycle and the real-time clock were fully functional at this point. There are a handful of screenshots from the Space World 97 guidebook showing locations not present in the demo. In this one, we can see a double-doored gate building, water, and some sort of tower, most likely the radio tower, and some trees and an NPC. The surfing screenshot shows a multitude of whirlpools, though not much else is shown. The surfing sprite is pretty similar to the final version. A handful of very washed out screenshots show areas which I don't believe are in the final game, and due to them being washed out, it's hard to make out some details. Not much to really note here, other than you can see that the trees are different from the final build, and the fences don't seem to have corners yet. The next one shows Old City, with 2 traditional looking signposts, an NPC, and a tall building. While the buildings and fences have a similar aesthetic to the final version, they're noticeably different. There's also circles on the floor, which possibly could have been some sort of stone pathway. Next up is an unnamed town, with what could have been the ruins of Alph, judging by the unknown on the wall, surrounded by stone circles and trees. In the center is either a waterfall, muddy steps, or a mudslide, though it's hard to tell. The buildings look very different from the final version, with somewhat more detail to the windows. From a video I'll show in a minute, comes the battle screen showing Girafarig and Chikorita. Doesn't look like genders had been implemented yet, and you can see Chikorita's full body in the back sprite. Experience bar is present though. In 1999, a promotional video was released showing a far more completed game than previously seen. Something notable is that the music in the trailer is not used anywhere in the final game, and from what I can tell, in any other promotional material. On that subject, here's all the footage I can find for Space World 97, and this particular build of Gold and Silver.
Uppfinningar. Och besöker man Japan måste man vara välklädd. Otroligt stort just nu i Japan är Pocket Monsters. Man går runt i en labyrint och kämpar mot små fula monster. Vinner man fighten så äger man monstret och efter ett tag har man en hel samling. Sen kan man koppla ihop sina GameBoy-dosor och byta monster med sina kompisar.
You use the interconnecting cable between the Game Boys to trade your Pikachu for one or more characters from someone else. So there's a whole sort of cultural or gaming social environment established around Pocket Monsters.
Pocket Monsters kom för 2 år sedan och de har sålts i 7,5 miljoner exemplar i Japan. Och alla prylarna till är en hel industri i sig. I slutet av nästa år anfaller de Sverige.
そしてなんといっても今回一番の盛り上がりを見せていたのがこちら。来年の3月発売予定のポケモン金銀。アサリども早速体験してみた。今回は何でしょう。これいない。あ、なんだこれ。あれ、いますね。いませんね。新しいの出た。羽子。これはどんな特徴が。まだ研究中ということなんですが、まあ草ポケモンですね。そうですね。とりあえずは。まだ得体の知れない。吸い取った。なんか。いいですよ。かなりいいですね。今一つダメだ。登場が待ち遠しいポケモン金銀。遊び方はこれまで通りだが、今回はフィールド、ライバル、トレーナー、ポケモンそれぞれこれまでにない新しいものが続々登場するらしい。なんと今回のポケモンの中には道具を持って戦うことのできるものもいるとか。詳しい情報はまだまだ秘密のベールに包まれたまま。その新しい魅力についてはさまざまな噂が飛び交っているようだが、ポケモンの魅力がさらに大きくパワーアップしたことは間違いなし。
Next up, while not at Space World but released in the same year from a handful of different magazines, comes a few more screenshots. Notable things in these show houses with 2 chimneys, another gate building, fancier fences, fancier flowers than in the final version, and a large 4-doored building, possibly a department store or something akin. Then there's a big drought of notable information on the internet, and on articles in Korokoro I've looked through during 1998 and early 1999. The Space World 97 build of Gold and Silver was apparently playable in January at the World Hobby Fair. Here's a few little bits of information I found from Korokoro over the development. The January issue of 98 showed a recap of all the information they'd released so far, showing the full completed art for the rival and the playable character, as well as a comparison of them to the rival and player character from Red and Blue. There was also some artwork of Artfrost using the item finder and Slowking using something. Side note, there's also a lot of pictures of Imakuni in these. I'm so glad to see him. I miss you, Imakuni. Please do more work with the Pokemon Company. There's a little bit more information on Marill, Snubbull, and Donphan in the July issue, mostly due to the information focusing around the first movie. 1999 gave us some far more finished looking screenshots of the battle screen, with more polished sprites for the Pokemon themselves, the complete Picnica sprite, and what looks like the egg hatching screen. The following May gave us more details on Marill, Blossom, Hoot, and Slowking, showing their finished artwork. June's issue showed Togepi and Ladybird's artwork, as well as screenshots showing the unknown cave in the National Park, the Pokédex screen, and, once again, the prototype bag screen. July showed Lugia's final artwork, as well as Elekid, the PC, Cherrygrove City, Tojo Falls. The Kimono Girl sprite also looks a lot more saturated in terms of colour, but that could just be the screenshot they used. By now, the game looks pretty much complete, aside from the absence of the gender marker on the battle screen. In August 1999, another demo was showcased at Space World, with Game Freak stating the game to be about 90% complete at this point. A few months later in November, more screenshots came about showing the difference in the bag screen, and Genta's still not being present on the battle screen, so it looks like that was a pretty late addition. Full artwork for the starters came out in CoroCoro a month prior to the release of the game, and from November of the release to March of 2000, they released the official artwork of most of the Gen 2 Pokemon. And that's pretty much all of the content floating around on the internet right now relating to pre-release content in magazines and events. Though there's probably a handful of things that were announced or talked about in other magazines that haven't come to light. It's always really interesting to me how much of a 180 they did. The game looked very different during Space World 97. Some parts of the tile set look similar, while others look a lot more detailed. And I think I'll forever be hoping I can one day see more Space World 97 footage, mostly to see the Pokemon which didn't make it into the final cut. It's probably pretty obvious by now that I really love pre-release content, and concept artwork, and video game betas, and Pokemon stuff in general. Onto the stuff still present in the game post-release that didn't make it into the final. As previously mentioned, there's a multitude of unused maps with a lot of differences. I'm going to be going through them in order of appearance, breaking down some of those differences, although there may be one or two things that I miss. New Bark Town still has the water opening to Route 27, however has a Pokemon Center, fences, and uses a different tile set. The buildings are closer together, and the water wraps around the area, rather than just the little opening to Route 27. Cherry Grove is far smaller, missing the water part to the left of the city. The buildings, like New Bark, are closer together and have a different tile set to them. A smaller building separates the mart and the Pokemon Center, and the city is bordered by bushes rather than trees. Another thing to note is the small pond of water in the upper right hand corner is missing in the beta map. Violet City is very different, with a much more open feeling to it. Sprout Tower is in the center of the city, surrounded by trees and bushes, and uses a different roof tile set. The mart and center are next to each other, and there's a few more larger buildings around. You can also see the ruins of Alf peeking in on the bottom left hand side, though this is just a dummy area in both and doesn't have any actual warp information in either the final or the beta version. There are also boulders surrounding one of the larger buildings in the beta version. Azalea is weird. The layout is very different, with a house hidden behind a fence on the left, a house on the right needing cut to be accessed, the ocean bordering the bottom. As previously mentioned, there's no gym in the beta version, and the exit to Ilex Forest is at the top of the map rather than to the left. Goldenrod is pretty similar in terms of there are still tons of buildings everywhere, but the gym is on the other side of the city. There's no tile set for the radio tower, the mart is small rather than the department store in the final version, and there's an exit to the left of the city. Some speculate Goldenrod may have been a port, but it could just be leading to another small route. Considering the beta maps in general, it seems like the overall layout of Johto may have been very different even close to release. Ekritique originally had its gym on the top left-hand corner, with the two towers at opposite corners, Burn Tower being on the bottom left. Morty's gym was also hidden behind a cut tree. Most notable is the fact that there's a train line running through the city, suggesting that this was meant to be a midway stop between Goldenrod and Saffron, which would place it somewhere completely different in the overworld map. Olivine is pretty similar. The lighthouse is on the opposite side of the map, and the gym is at the bottom by the port rather than at the top by the entrance. The lighthouse has a fence around it, so you'd need surf before you could reach it. What can be assumed to be Cianwood City is far smaller, with exits at the top and the left of the city. It has two less buildings, as well as all of them being close together, and is bordered by bushes rather than rocks. It looks like if this is Cianwood, it may not have been an island originally, or perhaps was attached to a route before you could access the city. Mahogany is pretty much the same, though the Martin houses are switched, and the gym and center are switched. Lake of Rage is very, very different. While the final has two buildings, one hidden behind a bush maze, the early one has 6 buildings, being a gym. The lake is a slightly different shape in the final version. There's no indication of what Lake of Rage would have been called if it were a town, or if it would have kept its name. And there's no indication if Bugsy was meant to be the gym leader here, or if it was meant to be someone different. Blackthorn City is a little closer together with regards to the buildings. The gym is in a different place, and Dragon's Den seems to have been a tower-like building. There are exits to the city on the left and at the bottom, rather than just at the bottom in the final version. An Unnamed Forest Map exists, which could be any number of things, from an original version of Ilex Forest, which matches up with the exit at the top of the beta Azalea town, an early version of Mount Silver, or a potential new version of Viridian Forest. However, the layout doesn't look that similar to the original Viridian Forest, so I kinda doubt that. There's a handful of caves, probably used to test tile sets, a couple of unused Sprout Tower floors, as well as different maps for the actual floors. some alternate areas for the rocket hideout. The most infamous of all unused maps in the games, however, is the Fuchsia City Safari Zone, which was either scrapped pretty early on in development or had the vast majority of its actual maps removed before release. Whilst the real reason for it being removed is unknown, it's most likely to be time or space constraints, or there were struggles with what Pokemon to put in it. They could have gone with the same ones of Generation 1, but that would remove the draw-in of cross-compatibility trading between Gen 1 and Gen 2 games. There's no wild Pokemon data program for the grass, but there is for fishing. You can get Krabby, Kingler, Staryu, Magikarp, and Corsola. A recent discovery in the game's code has led some to believe that there was going to be another time of day color setting. In the final, we have morning, day, and night, but a fourth type, which appears completely black, save for the overworld sprites and for the lights of the houses, as far as I can tell, exists in the coding of the games. This may not be noteworthy, and could have just been used for testing purposes and never intended as a third setting at all, but considering there's a morning palette, a day palette, and an evening palette, a late night palette would make sense, perhaps between midnight and 6 AM. It could also be a tester version of a setting for caves which require flash to navigate. There exists a complete map of a house in Olivine City where there is a woman who refers to a pharmacy in Ecruteak City, instead of Cianwood City in both Japanese and English. In English, the quote is, "When my Pokemon got sick, a pharmacist in Ecruteak made some medicine for me." Also worth noting is that she has a Rhydon in her house, which has a bugged overworld sprite that intermittently changes between its own and the one resembling a Clefairy. The warp data is intact, and in the top left-hand corner of Olivine City, in the middle of the trees. It's so far off in the corner though, it seems as though Game Freak just moved it rather than deleting it. Assumably, it was going to be the house in the top left-hand corner of the beta map. Some Pokemon are able to flee despite never being encountered in the wild. The fleeing encounters are separated into 3 tables. The first table is a 10% chance to flee, the second is a 50% chance, and the third is for the legendary beasts, with a 100% chance of fleeing. 10% includes Eevee, Porygon, Togetic, and Umbreon, although not Espeon for some reason. And 50% chance is for the legendary birds. This may have been testers rather than ever intended to actually be used, but if they were, it could hint that the legendary birds were originally going to be roaming Pokemon like Suicune, Entei, and Raikou. There exist several unused text strings hinting at potential features and a missing side quest. First up is Sweet Honey, which would later be used in Generation 4 to attract Pokemon to trees. It seems to have worked the same way here, judging from the text strings, which read, "My Pokemon is an expert at collecting sweet honey. I'll share some with you. I want to give you some sweet honey, but you have no room for it. Here you go, have some sweet honey. Player received sweet honey. My little brother takes sweet honey and goes somewhere with it. I wonder what he's up to. Did you put sweet honey on a tree? It takes about a day for a Pokemon to be drawn to it. Did you put sweet honey on a tree? What happened to it?" While here it says that it takes about a day, in Generation 4 it takes about 6 hours for a Pokemon to appear. Given the relation to trees, it's possible that sweet honey was replaced by the headbutt mechanic. Another set of text strings is a potentially scrapped side quest in Ecruteak. However, this quest may have been moved to the SS Am. The text string reads, oh no, my daughter is missing. No, she couldn't have gone to the burnt tower. I told her not to go near it. People seem to disappear there. Oh, what should I do?" There also exists an unused event script, complete with text for a level 40 Entei. The script consists of 3 parts. Text on screen, play Entei's cry, initiate a battle with a wild level 40 Entei. Some more interesting unused text strings, originally reported by Hakuda 2 and translated by Glitterberry, include, "If you didn't bring a Pokemon, forget it," in an apparently Osakan-style accent. "You can't get off here," relating to the bike. "Bzzz. You must have a Pokemon to use this," relating to the PC. "No windows available for popping," when the player attempts to check the status of a level 0 Pokemon. There's text for sending half of your prize money to your mum, or all of your prize money to your mum, rather than the 1/4 in the final game. There's commands for the Safari Zone, despite it being removed, as well as Pokemon reactions to the rock and bait. "We intend to sell items for Pokemon to hold. This is a free gift. Have a Pokemon hold it," in the Goldenrod department store. Bird type and several of the Gen 1 trainer class names also remain in text strings. I hear there's a Pokemon that looks just like a tree. You can reveal its identity using the Sylphscope 2, referring to Sudowoodo, and an unused item which may have been replaced by the Squirt Bottle. It's a photo of the Research Center's founder, Professor Silktree. Pokemon Journal homepage. It hasn't been updated. The Windows save area was exceeded. Obtained the Voltorb badge. What do you want to play with? There are also a handful of unused place names, such as Haunted House, Lavender Radio Tower, Silphco, Cerulean Cave, Special, Fast Ship, Viridian Forest, and a few others. There exists a few English text strings relating to the daycare and breeding. You need 2 Pokemon for breeding. Breeding isn't possible. The compatibility is value at 0xD151. Should they breed? There is no egg. It's going to hatch. There's also a lot of unused text for battles and events with the rival, such as, I'll make Team Rocket history, and I'm going to grind that lance under my heels. I knew you were lying. I've repaid my debt to you. With my Pokemon, I'm going to beat the champion, and become the world's greatest trainer. With my partners, I'm going to be champion. When it comes down to it, nothing can beat power. I don't need anything else. That's kinda edgy, but I still love Silver. Another unused feature, and a very bizarre one, is the ability to name your mother. Not sure what purpose this feature would have had, or if it was ever seriously considered, but in the final game, it serves as a place to hold the player's name information during the dude catching tutorial early on in the game. The character Cal, which exists in the trainer house in Kanto, has 2 alternate teams which can't be fought during normal gameplay. Team 1 is the Johto starters at level 10, and Team 2 is the Johto starters second stages at level 30, implying he may have been challengeable before accessing Kanto. Perhaps there were meant to be more trainer houses in different cities. Discovered by the Pokemon Disassembly Project, there is an unused old man sprite with no walking animation. It's been suggested he may have been intended as a sprite for gym leaders Chuck or Price, as he looks similar to both of them. Another weird unused thing is that the contestants of the National Park Bug Catching Contest have a -1% chance of catching a Venomoth, which you can't catch in the National Park anyway. I assume this means that it was originally intended to be caught, potentially at the rarity of Beedrill and Butterfree, but was scrapped for some reason, and they didn't have time to take it out as a potentially caught bug for the NPC, so they just dropped it down to impossible, I guess. There also exists a number of removed or dummied out items, which appear as Kabichu, a portmanteau of Kabigon and Pikachu in the Japanese version, and they appear as Terusama in the English version. One of them, mentioned earlier, is a set of items which give immunity from one status ailment. There were 6 of these dummied out held items, with each one corresponding to a different status condition. So, one preventing you from being poisoned, one preventing you from being burned, one for confusion, and so on. When activated, the ones corresponding to poison, sleep, paralysis, and confusion display Pokemon's protected by item, while the ones for burn and frozen display no text, so it was probably removed. A handful more things which seem to be leftovers from development are things such as a minecart image discovered in the cave's tile sets, and the player character's early sprites which depict him without his bag. There's also 4 maps without events programmed for the Pokemon Lab in Cinnabar Island, or the former Pokemon Lab in Cinnabar Island, as well as an alternate Game Corner game. There's also some unused content from the Gen 1 games, including items, bird type, and the Mimic menu, though these are most likely things Game Freak just forgot to remove. Another thing of note is that a few years ago, concept artwork appeared on the internet for a prototype design of Raikou, which had a similar colour scheme to Suicune, appearing a bit more storm-like. This appeared to come from a lecture which Muneo Saito presented, so that's probably how it wound up appearing online. Muneo Saito was the designer of the legendary beasts, as well as contributing to a lot of other Pokemon designs throughout the years. It's interesting that we got to see this prototype design, considering Game Freak is usually very hesitant to allow any type of prototype or concept artwork to leak out. Game Freak have said multiple times that they keep Pokemon designs around for future inspiration, so it makes sense that they would be hesitant to allow much concept artwork of the actual Pokemon to get out into the public. Lastly, we'll look at a couple of changes which happened after the game released. So, changes that happened when it was localized to other countries. There are some obvious localization changes, like the name changes. Japan and Korea having a 5-character name limit, and all other editions having a 7-character name limit, and alignment of text and information on the status screen and trade screens to better conserve space. A number of sprites were changed, other than the infamous Jinx, to better line up with the official artwork. Slowpoke and Feraligatr had their belly stripes removed in the international version, whereas Apom had a belly spot added. Teddiursa had a spot of colour on its paws added, Lantern had a spot of colour on its face removed, and Stantler had light-coloured spots added to its back. Donphan's trunk, Blissey's shoulder wings, and Sneasel's eyes were adjusted, as were the back sprites of Wooper, which had a stripe, Sunkern and Quillfish, which had more stripes, Slugma, which had spots, Politoed, which had more spots of colour, and a few others which had additional minor changes. Sprite differences weren't just limited to the Pokemon, there were some for trainers too. The beauty class had her skirt lengthened and her wink removed, the swimmer class had her wink edited, though her outfit remains unchanged. The fisher class originally had a cigarette in his mouth, but this was removed. The sage class originally had their hands in a praying position, though this was changed to crossed arms. And the medium class no longer has any prayer beads. The bike shop in Johto and Kanto was originally called Miracle Cycle, but this was removed in the international versions. No idea why. In the Japanese, Korean, French, and Spanish versions of the game, the Pokemon displays shop on it, whereas it displays Mart in the English, German, and Italian versions. Whilst Gold and Silver could be played on the Game Boy, in Korea they could only be played on the Game Boy Color system, and of course a multitude of glitches were removed from the international versions. So that pretty much wraps up the majority of information currently available as of January 2018 about the early builds of Gold and Silver, things we can gather from leftovers in the game, and an added bit on regional changes. I don't doubt that, even approaching 20 years post-release, there will be a few more bits and pieces unearthed. Maybe one day Game Freak will even release some of the information themselves. That's pretty unlikely. As previously mentioned, I'm really interested in the development of the Pokemon games, being the franchise I grew up with, especially the early games. Gold and Silver have an interesting development history, and it's always interested me. Pokemon is my special interest, and when new games come out I usually try and keep up with the development information as best I can, even though these days they're a fair bit more tight-lipped about pre-release information. So, if any more substantial information comes to light, I'll either update this video or make a new one. With regards to Pokemon Crystal, there are a few minor differences, but there aren't actually that many because a lot of it was built off of Gold and Silver. So I probably won't make a separate video covering that, despite the fact that Pokemon Crystal is actually my favourite Pokemon game. I'm going to try and leave sources below for most of the things said in here in the description, but to the best of my knowledge, everything here is accurate, as I've tried to, where possible, combine multiple sources to create an accurate picture of what the development history was like. Yeah, it's probably going a bit far for a video about a children's game, but I wrote my university dissertation on anime and cartoons, so hey, thanks for watching.